So tonight, I will speak to everyone about the choice and the stakes in this election.
The truth behind Kamala Harris, exposing her lies and inconsistencies. From her track record as a prosecutor to her high-profile political positions, Kamala Harris has made countless claims. But how many of these claims stand up to scrutiny? Today, we're uncovering the gaps, inconsistencies, and outright lies in her story. In this segment, we focus on border matters and Kamala Harris's past speeches and contradictory comments on issues of crime policy, healthcare, and others. We will highlight clips from her earlier interviews in which the situation didn't match her statements and actions, and her statements and promises were low, to say the least, for a U.S. senator.
And she ended with a big presidential flourish, a big presidential vision. Nearly 250 years ago, America was born when we wrested freedom from a petty tyrant.
Her shifting stand on the border crisis. What is her plan to solve the crisis on the American border? She stated, addressing root causes, but failed to elaborate further. It begs the questions, begrudgingly being a border czar. How come there was never an articulated, comprehensive plan? And critics wonder how the root cause is one that she uses over and over as a cover without ever having to try providing actual solutions. And this is because the numbers keep increasing, right? The border is secure, a misleading claim. In April 2021, Harris publicly committed to addressing the root causes of migration in the Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
This is not a candidate for president who is thinking about how to make your life better. This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance.
The approach was to tackle poverty, violence, and instability driving people north. However, after a single visit to the region, Harris made little visible progress on the crisis. In fact, migration from Central and South America continued, with Venezuela, another key source of migrants, remaining unstable as President Nicolas Maduro maintained power, undeterred by international pressure. While the Biden-Harris administration made symbolic gestures toward regional aid, they failed to follow through on substantial interventions, leaving the border crisis unresolved.
US Vice President Kamala Harris has moments ago finished what's been called her closing arguments to voters, and in a poignant location. The presidential hopeful addressing supporters a short walk from the White House.
Border security bill and shifting the blame. While Harris claims to support criminal justice reform, her past tells a different story. Consider the wrongful conviction of Jamal Truelove, sentenced to 50 years on her watch. Despite evidence pointing to his innocence, her office pursued the case aggressively. Kamala Harris has flip-flopped on marijuana. She once upheld strict prosecution of marijuana-related cases in California, yet later embraced legalization. As public sentiment changed, so did her stance. For those convicted under her leadership, her sudden advocacy feels less like reform and more like opportunism. Criminal justice reform and the Jamal Truelove case. While Harris claims to support criminal justice reform, her past tells a different story. Consider the wrongful conviction of Jamal Truelove, sentenced to 50 years on her watch. Despite evidence pointing to his innocence, her office pursued the case aggressively. When this wrongful conviction was overturned, Harris stayed silent, never addressing her role in Truelove's ordeal.
Has Kamala Harris right now back in front, a 4-point lead, 51-47 in the matchup with former President Trump. That is up from about 2 points nationally a few weeks back, but they may not look exactly.
The marijuana hypocrisy. Kamala Harris has flip-flopped on marijuana. She once upheld strict prosecution of marijuana-related cases in California, yet later embraced legalization. As public sentiment changed, so did her stance. For those convicted under her leadership, her sudden advocacy feels less like reform and more like opportunism. Comments about Trump, fact or fiction? Kamala Harris has consistently spoken out against Trump, calling his policies on immigration and criminal justice harmful and unjust. But here's where things get interesting. Despite her strong words, many of Trump's policies have been left in place by the current administration. including some that Harris herself condemned. From ongoing border security policies to immigration reforms, these continuities have led critics to question her credibility. If Harris was so opposed to Trump's policies, why are some of them still part of our current government's strategy? This contradiction is hard to overlook and leaves people wondering if her statements were based on principle or merely political rhetoric.
This was an excellent speech, but what strikes me is that what she said, talking about herself being a child of the civil rights movement, her parents taking her to marches in a stroller. She described growing up and watching her mom work out the bills and figure out how to buy her first home and
Healthcare policy shifts. At first, Kamala Harris was a vocal supporter of Medicare for all, promising voters a sweeping overhaul of healthcare to ensure universal coverage. But as the primaries progressed, her stance began to soften. She soon started to emphasize a more moderate approach, even proposing a public option plan that kept private insurance intact. These shifts have left some supporters feeling misled. Was her initial support for Medicare for all a genuine commitment or a strategy to capture progressive voters? Harris's changing healthcare stance leaves a trail of confusion and raises questions about her willingness to take a clear, unwavering stand on this critical issue. Climate change commitments versus reality. Kamala Harris has made climate change a core talking point, often framing it as one of her most urgent priorities. She's promised to champion aggressive policies for clean energy, reduce emissions, and hold polluters accountable. But her prosecutorial past tells a different story. During her tenure in California, there's little evidence of significant action on environmental protection, with many critics arguing her climate priorities were lacking. This inconsistency between her rhetoric and record raises doubts. Has Harris really been an advocate for the environment? Or are her current stances designed to align with popular opinion? The gap between her statements and past actions creates a credibility issue that environmental advocates continue to question. Harris's pattern of misleading statements on the economy. Kamala Harris's recent claims about the U.S. economy have raised questions about her honesty. Known for her effective communication as a former prosecutor-turned-politician, Harris has recently made statements that appear misleading or inaccurate. In an interview with the National Association of Black Journalists, she stated that the administration came in during the worst unemployment since the Great Depression, echoing similar comments made previously. However, data from the pandemic shows that while the unemployment rate did peak at 14.8% in April 2020, it had fallen to 6.7% by December 2020. Still high, but not the worst since the 1930s. This statement seemingly aims to underscore the Biden-Harris administration's economic improvements, despite inflation reaching a 40-year high by summer 2022. Rising costs of essential items like food and housing continue to strain American households, with a Primerica survey last year reporting that 72% of middle-class families felt their income lagged behind inflation, while 74% struggled to save for the future. Stance on criminal justice reform. Words versus actions. Kamala Harris has repeatedly expressed support for criminal justice reform, advocating for measures to reduce incarceration and prioritize rehabilitation. But as California's Attorney General, she upheld policies that led to the incarceration of thousands, particularly affecting communities of color. Her office defended some controversial practices that contributed to California's high incarceration rates. Contradictions on police reform. Kamala Harris has been vocal about the need for police reform, especially in the wake of public demands for accountability. However, her record on this issue raises doubts. During her time as a prosecutor, she supported policies that shielded police officers in cases of excessive force, standing behind certain law enforcement practices instead of pursuing change. These past actions contrast sharply with her recent stance, leaving critics wondering if her support for reform is more about appealing to public sentiment than a genuine commitment to change. Her approach to police accountability remains a controversial topic that continues to shadow her current advocacy. Public perception and media. Over the years, media analysis and public perception have painted a complex picture of Kamala Harris. Supporters praise her as a progressive leader, while critics highlight her inconsistencies and contradictions. Her shifting stances on key issues like criminal justice and healthcare have created a narrative that's hard to ignore. With so many changes in her positions, the question remains, who is the real Kamala Harris? As public scrutiny grows, her political choices and perceived contradictions will continue to shape how she's viewed by the American people. Thank you for joining us as we uncovered some of the gaps in Kamala Harris's statements. What do you think? Are her claims reflective of genuine change, or are they political moves? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more critical insights.